that if you look like Abraham Lincoln overstepped his power, but I would say that was for a good cause. Like I'm very thankful that he did that because it enables like the Emancipation Proclamation and us to have the country we do today. And so, can you justify that? Do the ends justify the means?
Yeah.
I don't know. What are the ends? Who decides whether the ends are the right thing?
And no
There's
one
a lot
does.
of questions.
And it's history that is going to judge everybody, regardless.
Yes.
A lot of people like, they're like, oh, he was bad, this and that. But I'm like, he thought that he was fighting for the right reason.
Yeah.
You know, like people, people who in the South who were fighting, they thought they were fighting for the right reason. They weren't like, oh, I'm gonna wake up and become a bad guy today. Because the world is more nuanced than people think. There's no bad and good.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks they're good. It's just that if you win the war, you get to write the narrative. Like, this is why I did this. And since you won, people are gonna like, oh, okay.
So here's a question though. Like, if we think about this, like, you say everyone thinks that they're doing good, but then the question becomes, and we're getting into something more complicated here. Like, what is good? Like, what determines what is good? Because, like, you're right. People in the South didn't wake up and were like, yeah, we'll be on the bad guy side today. Like, they thought there was, I mean, like, I'm sure there were people who didn't have the best motives, without question, but there were also people who thought that they were fighting for what was right. So the question then becomes, like, who is the arbiter of what is a good outcome and what's not?
That is true.
That's the question.
No one knows. It's just that.
I mean, to say something like I would say that, like, there is an answer to that question, and I think this is interesting when you think about things like religion and having a moral standard and a moral code, because there is something out there written on all of our hearts where we know to some extent what is right and what is wrong, but that's a very complicated question.
It is I think good and bad is determined by our perceptions of the world. For example, I heard this quote, like, someone's terrorist is someone else's freedom fighter. So someone brands this person as a terrorist. For example, let's say George Washington was a terrorist because under the British Empire, he sought to secede and leave. And if he didn't win the war, history would have judged him as a bad person. Like, look, what are you trying to do? Like, this great empire is protecting you and everything, and you're trying to secede. It brings up the whole conversation of taxing and how we're not represented in parliaments. But yeah, I don't think no one knows. Like, Osama bin Laden, he probably thought he was a good person, or I'm doing this necessary evil to protect my country and stuff. But, like, look, you are a bad person. You did kill a lot of people.
The question then becomes, what is the basis for our judicial standards? Because because if nobody knows what's good and what's bad, then no one can pass judgment on anybody else, because it's all a matter of perspective and basically social construct, right? But we do pass judgment on other people. We have things like juries, we have things like judges. So what is the basis for that if nobody knows? That would be my question.
I have no idea. So let's say you kill somebody, like, obviously a whole of society is going to think that you did something bad, but the murderer might have a good reason of why he did it, but, like, no one's going to believe you, and the jury is probably going to find you guilty and stuff like that.
And so why does the whole jury, is it just because they've been raised in a society where murder is presented to them as something that's bad?
I think so. Yeah.
See, I would disagree with that, but that's an interesting idea.
Why would you disagree with that?
So, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I believe that there is a God, and that God has given us a moral standard, so that there are things, and there is in a sense in which we can go against that moral standard to an extent. I mean, I've said a lot throughout this episode that, like, people are broken. I mean, I believe all people are sinners in a sense that they're all broken.
Imperfect, yeah.
And so we don't follow that moral standard. But in some sense, there is a law written on all of our hearts. I mean, I think there's a reason why we're all, like, generally, and there are exceptions, but people who have kind of destroyed themselves so much that they find things like murder, like, not to be a problem. But in general, we all view murder as something wrong. There's a reason why for hundreds of years, like since the beginning of humanity, people have, like, bar a few societies, murder has been viewed as something that's wrong, or like, think about other things. And so, like, yes, there are twisted societies where, like, they have human sacrifice and things like that. Don't get me wrong. And I think that just shows the depth of depravity of human nature. But I would argue that, like, I think that there is a moral standard. I think that that's, like, what our judicial system in a very loose way is based off of, and that there is something that we can hold each other accountable to, and that's something that is given to us by God, which is a moral standard.
That's interesting, because a lot of people do use God as a moral standard and his, like, message, and whether it be through the Bible, through the Quran, through the Torah, everyone has their own way of looking at what is good and what is bad. But history has shown that a lot of people even use religion to justify something that is bad. A lot of people, Israel, Palestine, there's the whole like religion also plays a part because the Jewish people believe that that is their home that God gave them. Palestine are like, no, this is our home, we've driven it. And they use religion to justify this.
Yeah.
Or like Crusaders, Christians,
Yeah.
they use religion to justify violence. Even Muslims, sometimes they use religion to justify violence when they, bomb or attack places. So, yeah, I think a lot of people do use religion, but you have to be careful about it. Like, if you look at history, a lot of people have done bad things in the name of religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think religion as a whole. I mean, I think that more speaks to the fallen nature of people, and less to the inability of God to. Like it doesn't. That's not a representation of God. That's a representation of those people's. Like that's what I would argue as a Christian. So I'm a Christian. So I mean, I strongly believe that like the only way to know God is through His Son Jesus. But I would not equate but I agree with you with the fact that like the crusade, a lot of things the Crusaders did were terrible, and there's been horrible crimes committed throughout history in the face of Christianity. I mean, there were Christians in the South during the Civil War who argued that slavery was something that was taught by the Bible, I would not agree with whatsoever. But I think that is not a representation of God and the lack of His moral standard. That is more representation of those people and their fallenness and the way in which they've twisted that.
Oh, okay. So it's basically what you're trying to say is people are imperfect and they're gonna use this message.
They will use anything, even things like religion, even like good things that God gives us. They will turn to purposes that are evil.
Do you think people who are agnostic and atheists don't have a moral standard because they don't follow God?
I would say that if you follow Gnosticism and atheism to their ultimate conclusion, there is no moral standard. But I don't think that people who are atheists and Gnostics don't have a moral standard, but I think their moral standard is based on the moral standard that God's given them, that's written on their heart.
What's the ultimate conclusion of, let's say, atheism?
The ultimate conclusion is that there is no God.
Okay, what of agnostics?
That's more vague. I mean, you would have to describe to me what you think of. What do you think of as being the ultimate conclusion? Describe it to me.
Well, for agnostics, they would think that they would say they don't know. So I don't know what moral standards they will use because they're not for sure going to use the Bible or the Quran. But I know atheism is like there's no God. Like I know for a fact there's no God.
Atheism. But that's a very arrogant claim. Like think about it. In order for you to say that there's no God, that means you know everything, right?
Yeah.
So do you know everything? Do I know everything? And I mean, of course, we're not like incredibly intelligent individuals. Let's say like there's some amazingly brilliant people in the world. But I think to claim that you know for a fact that there's no God is probably one of the most arrogant claims you can ever make. That means you know everything there is to know. Everything that there ever has been to know, everything there is to know now, and everything that there ever will be to know. Yeah,
I don't think, that's why I think they fall short in that sense. Right. I'm like, how do you, although I think there might be intelligence that's way higher than us, that even us humans can understand that could justify a lot of things. Yeah. So I'm like, who are you to make like I know for a fact? It could be even sometimes science could kind of fall short because, as I said, it might be intelligence that's higher than us that we can't even comprehend.
Right.
That could justify some things and that could not justify some things. So but when you say that when they reach the ultimate conclusion, they have no moral standard, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I would argue. I don't think, if you believe that everything is basically biologically predetermined, right? Like, let's think about it from an evolutionary atheism perspective, right? And then there is, the only standard that there is like whatever works, basically, or whatever is like advantageous. So there's no explanation. I mean, I think this is one of the problems of evolution. There's no explanation for things that we see like among humans and even among animals, things like altruism and care for other people or something like that. Because if it's just eat or be eaten, then why do we have those things? Okay. And I mean, I would say like, and I think that's a certain shortcoming that it has. I mean, like, I just think like, if you were really an atheist, then there is no, if there's nothing out there other than like this world and success in this world, right, let's say, right, there is no moral standard. Like what is the moral standard? The moral standard is whoever comes out on top, right? Yeah. And however you get on top, that's fine. So if you have to kill people to get on top, that's fine. If you have to, like take advantage of people, if you have to make other people starve, if you have to do this, there's no problem with that. The answer is like, what is the only thing is like material success here and now, if that. And so there's no standard for what stops that. I mean, like, unless you, I mean, if you think about something else, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Well, yeah, would you say without religion, the world would be the way it is in terms of rule of law, in terms of the justice system? You think is that?
No, I don't think it would be the way it is. I 100%. I mean, I think that rule of law and our justice system is all based off of both a moral law given to us by God and also a moral law written on like all of our hearts to an extent. Now, again, I say because we're all fallen, that's distorted, so it's not perfect in all of us. I mean, I do things that I know are wrong, and I mean, I'm sure you've done things that you know are wrong, and so we don't perfectly follow that, but it is there. I mean, we do know the very fact that we can do something and then know it's like I have this experience, like we can do something and then know it's wrong.
Yeah, conscience.
If there was no if there was nothing except if you're an atheist, I don't understand how you can really explain that. If you know what I mean, because there is no standard. There's nothing that's really wrong. So why are we bothered when we do certain things?
Okay, why shouldn't we kill people just because?
What?
Why shouldn't we?
You're asking asking me a question, or you're saying, are you just?
No, I'm asking you, like, why shouldn't we just kill people?
I mean, well, I would say as a Christian that I think that people are like, and again, I believe the Bible to be the Word of God. And I think that's, I mean, we could get into, that's a whole other discussion. But that people are made in the image of God, so that we are a creation that God has made. In some extent, we are not gods, but we're made in His likeness in certain areas, and so God is a God who loves life and preserving life, and so He calls us. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the fact that God says you don't kill other people. Okay. I mean, that would be what I would say comes down to the standard. Okay. But the reasons for that are that people are made in the image of God, and that God values life.
Is there a secular reason why you shouldn't kill someone?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by secular. But from I think that from an atheistic perspective.
No, atheist. Just like, just like in law.
From a law perspective.
From a law perspective.
I mean, I think you can argue that it's bad. Like, I think you can look at it from a societal level. And I'm not educated enough necessarily to get into all of this. That like it's bad for society. It does have consequences for the person, other than purely like it can have consequences for your like mental health, all kinds of stuff. It could not. Like there are ways in which societally doing certain things is advantageous. But I would argue that the reason that doing certain things is advantageous to society is because God has instilled those things in us, and God wants human flourishing and the flourishing of society. And so I think that anything that we have within our society that inhibits us from doing those, like the laws that we have that inhibit us from killing each other, let's say, are laws that are based off of the moral standard that God has given us. I mean, you can even go back and to something like the Code of Hammurabi, which is a thing that's hundreds, like thousands of years old, and that's a law code. And I would even argue that something like that I think is based off of God's moral standard. While Hammurabi wasn't even a Christian or like a Jew or whatever, like there's a sense in which he knows that there's a standard of some kind. And if it was just like in that thing, just eat or be eaten, like the biggest guy comes out on top, why do we need standards? Just kill all your enemies.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let's